The Going Gets Tough from the Get-Go by Ween. This was requested by Nate Brewster, and he specifically requested for it to be, inspired by the live version from At the Cat's Cradle, because it has lots of guitar work on it. So as you may know, the album Pure Guava version, as far to my knowledge, has no guitar on the recording. The only melodic instruments, other than the bass, is the little synthesized bell sounding thing, whatever that is. At least it sounds very synthesized anyway. But so I'm actually doing my first real bass lesson for this song, because the bass really is absolutely integral to the song and the sound of it. And I could teach it on guitar, but I figured I should just go the extra mile and try to do a bass lesson. Maybe you guys can let me know how I did on it. And there's also, interestingly, I found out some really interesting, drastic differences between how it was played on the album. I'm assuming that Diener played it, maybe Jeaner did, but I'm assuming Diener recorded this bass line on Pure Guava, and the way that Dave has played it in recent years, at least from the versions that I've listened to. The way that he plays it has some pretty significant differences, which I figured I should get into, and it sort of shows you how you can expand upon the song in your own way, right? So, anyway, I'll just go over the basic parts, and yeah. So we've got a couple different parts, and there's lots of variations, both in how Dave does it compared to Diener and how Diener does it on the album, just little variations in there, and I'll try and just touch upon those, and you can really just kind of do whatever you want with this bass line, as long as you keep like the essential elements of it, right? Because Dave certainly plays around with it a lot. So I'll just go over how it's played on the album first. Again, best to my knowledge. I don't typically, I don't have the best ear for figuring out bass, and bass is already much harder to decipher, in general, I would say, than it is to decipher, an instrument like a guitar and what it's playing. But I think I've done my homework here, and I think I did my best I feel pretty confident in knowing generally what's going on here. So on the album, we've got a couple main parts. This sort of main bass line that happens. Again, there's variations in that, but that's essentially it. That's the verse, right? And this is in the key of F sharp minor. And on the album, it's in G minor. It's just up half a step, and I'm pretty certain that they just sped the tape up, because it just makes so much more sense, especially when you do this little a chromatic run up from the open string in this particular bass line. It just makes so much more sense to do this kind of thing with that open string in that position, rather than doing this position shift on the first fret there from the 5th fret, which just feels a lot more clunky on bass guitar. You could do open D string, but it just doesn't feel as natural. Anyway, so that's the vibe, right? I always go for the sort of fretted notes on the lower string on bass guitar, because it just has a bit of a rounder sound, right? Anyway, so the actual bass line, we've got, right, so 4th fret A, then 2nd fret D, open E, 1st fret, 2nd fret. And it stops on that 2nd fret with a little drum fill hi-hat thing going on. And there's a little variation in there. Sometimes he'll just throw an extra little, after the pause, he'll just throw in a little extra note on the 2nd fret. And sometimes he'll go, so it'll be like, and sometimes it'll go, right? And I believe in one time during the chorus, he'll go, during the pause, he'll go, right? So just throw that open A string in there. So that's like the verse. And then whatever little fill you want to do. that's the verse essentially. And then the chorus, generally, there's still times where he does that basically the same lick, but he's gonna more often do this basically variation on the same thing, just a little bit faster and with more repetition. So that's just same notes, but he's gonna go, you know, he's gonna do that 3 times, and then sometimes he'll go, right, and then sometimes he'll go, and instead of doing that a 4th time, he'll just do it 3 times, and then do a little walk up there, and other times they'll do it an extra time and speed it up a little bit. Like that. So you can play around with that however you want. And so that's essentially the chorus. And again, you can switch it up however you want. You can... you can do what you want, but those are the basics of it. And then during the, I guess I'll call it the bridge, the sort of second half of the Goin Gets Tough from the Get-Go chorus in there, he's going to be doing, so the notes of this part are, right? So that's 2nd fret of D, then A, 5th fret. You can also go open string, but I don't recommend that with the open A string, but the 5th fret of the low E, and then 2nd fret low E, right? And best I can tell, and I think Dave does this live as well, is he's basically bending it, right? So, sorry. And I thought that he might have been like sliding up to him, and you can, it sounds kind of cool. It sounds kind of cool in its own way, but it's a little bit clunkier and it's a little bit more difficult to do. And I'm pretty sure that it sounds like he's bending it. And, you know, bending on bass strings has kind of a funny sound to it, and it's not the easiest thing to do. So you just got to sort of put some muscle into it and just sort of bend it. As long as you can sort of audibly hear the bend, it gets the point across, because it kind of sounds like almost like you're sliding on a fretless bass, right? It kind of has sort of a funny sound to it. And it gives the bass line kind of a warble during that part. Right? So it does that, and then that's essentially it. I mean, the variations on those and that's essentially the song. And then the song, of course, ends with, I think it's over now. And behind that is just... that's just repeating until it sort of fades off or whatever. Trails off. And I should also say you could slide into this 4th fret on the A string as well. Right, so if you feel like doing that, that's essentially the bass line. Now, to cover what Dave does on the sort of live versions that I see, they're playing it in the same key, but Dave is using different notes of the sort of chord, right? So he is going to go, what he does by default most of the time is, instead of, for the verse, right? Instead of, he's going to go, that's what he does. So he does 2nd fret, it's still F sharp, it's just a different voicing of it, which is interesting. So 2nd fret of the E string, open A string, 3rd fret of the A string, then chromatic up on the A string, it's the same kind of thing as the chromatic lick on the low E string, where you can just throw in whatever variation you do, but the variation I hear him doing most of the time is, right, that little, that he throws in there. So that's basically what he's doing for the verses. And of course, you throw in little fills and whatnot, but I'm not good enough to do that. So the chorus sort of variation that he does, it's really cool. I like it, but it's also interesting to compare it. So instead of, it's the same idea, but he's going to basically do an inversion of it. So he's going to do the same pattern, but he's going to slide up on the 4th fret of the D and then play the 2nd fret of the G. And instead of playing the open E, he's going to be playing 4th fret of the A string, right? So and you hear him going up on the A string again for that chromatic sound. So that's cool. It's, you know, it's a inversion of the same chord because it's F sharp minor still, and he's just using these notes. It just sounds cool, right? So that's cool. And the only other part is, of course, that bridge part. He's literally going to do the exact same thing, except he's going to lower it or raise it, I guess, by 1 string. So it's just G string, 4th fret, D string, 4th fret, and then it's a little hard on the fingers, but yeah, it's just that instead of 1 string lower. And that part I do find interesting to compare because the chord is actually different. He's going up a 4th, so the chord's like B minor instead of F sharp minor. So I think it's a little bit harder to do than the F sharp. If I was choosing, I personally like the F sharp better. But the if you're a real good bass player and you don't have any problem bending up these strings and skipping the strings across, and like I do, by all means do it on the B minor like how Dave does. And that's essentially it. Those are the sort of major differences between how it's played live that I could tell. So yeah, I mean, it's a really fun bass line, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm going to be teaching the guitar part, so stay tuned.